Well, thank you very much and welcome back here as we have the opportunity to talk to Eric Carstenson. He's the president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association. Let's just talk for a second about a typical installation of fiber at a customer's business or residence. Where does it start? How does it start? And kind of walk us through the process.
I got to do an installation last February up in Pierce, Nebraska, and it was really educational to me. And a couple things that I learned about that I really have crystallized in my mind that would be fun to talk about. One is, of course, it was in February, and so we had to work through the snow. And I got to do the easy part because when I got there, the hole that the fiber comes into was already opened up. So I didn't have to get in there and dig it open. And they had already figured out the way to trench the conduit into the home that we were connecting. But what I got to see was a home actually get connected with fiber to the premises. And so what we did is we had to bring the fiber up that was the not just to the home, but that was the network. We had to bring it up into a trailer. We'll call it a hut, and we had to figure out how to splice that. Well, what's involved in that? First of all, you've got to take off a bunch of the sheathing that covers the glass, and then you've got to work in a very clean environment because obviously we're dealing with just a piece of glass that is the thickness of a human hair. And of course, another thing, you got to be real careful you don't break that piece of glass. You can handle it and manage it, but then what we have to do is we have to splice that in, and that was one of the really kind of fun, interesting parts. You've got to figure out how to cleave that glass and then splice those two parts together so that you don't lose any of that optical signal going into the residence. And then, of course, once that's all done, you've got to pull it through that conduit. And I pulled it through the conduit and into that house where you've got to repeat the procedure, where you've got to go again and make that splice and make it all so it's optically clean and so forth. But then the customer has got that kind of broadband high-speed connectivity delivered right to their house.
Isn't that amazing?
It really is.
That sounds complicated. I'm glad I'm in radio. When you and your members talk about fiber, what excites you the most?
It's capacity. You know what? We don't really even know how much more capacity we can put on the kind of fiber that's installed in the ground throughout Nebraska. Let me explain a little bit. This is the way I think of it, and I know there are going to be engineers that are listening to this that are just going to be shaking their heads, but this is a good way to think of how fiber works. We know what binary is. Binary is on, off. It's light being on, light not being off. Well, we figured out you can shine light down a fiber optic cable and you can create a binary communication. But it's all one color of light. And then some really smart people looked at that and they said, you know what? We can take that and we can run it through a spectrum, and where we once had one light, we can now have 8 different lights. And they kept figuring out ways to split the light that was split and split and split it again. All of that carrying binary signal, on or off, light being on or off. And right now, we don't really know the physical limit of how much more we can put down that fiber. So what's exciting is when Nebraska companies put that kind of fiber optic connectivity into the ground, it really does future-proof. They just then need to work not with what's in the ground, but rather what's on the various ends of that fiber.
When your telephone companies and your members talk to people in the community, do they ever get surprised at somebody when they say, I can't believe we have this here in, name the rural area?
That happens a lot, and that's one of the real promises of this kind of connectivity is we keep discovering new ways to use it every day. And that's a couple of things, brings up a couple of interesting questions. A lot of people ask me, well, when will this be built? And the answer is it'll be built when smart people quit thinking of new things to use this capacity for. And yet again, that's one of the real promises for Nebraska, is because think about the content that's going over that connectivity. It's digital. And that means wherever this digital connectivity can be delivered, really anything can be done there. Whether that's a patent attorney that's doing global patents, or if it's a company developing video like Huddle does in Lincoln, Nebraska, that's now used all over the world. Wherever the content can be developed digitally and then broadcast or resent digitally, you can do it now anywhere in Nebraska.
That's really amazing. And if you think about the impact on rural communities, that's the part that allows people to work from anywhere. It's odd to me that some communities, 25 or 30,000 people large, which is a decent size in Nebraska, don't have fiber. But communities served by rural telephone companies, as small as Stanton, Nebraska, have fiber to every home. Is that because NTA members are using dollars that are earmarked for that, and they say we're going to invest in our communities?
Of course, what you want to see investment do is to bring the highest return for the right kind of technology. And there are a lot of things that don't require fiber right to the prem. Is it the gold standard? Absolutely. And someday, as the network evolves, more and more fiber will be deployed to more and more locations. But not every location for every mission needs fiber. What they do need is really fast internet. And a lot of the NTA members have figured out ways to deliver really, really fast internet over old copper connections and things like that. Now, to the consumer, does that matter? Well, not if you're getting what you need, not if you're able to either watch the TV show you want to watch or have the kind of connectivity you want to have. What it does mean is that some of the NTA members have found new and innovative ways to use that investment that's already in the ground in forms of older technology. And what they do is they take and they push fiber further and further out into their network. So what we call the last mile may just be copper, but it's fed with different technologies up further and further out into the rural areas. But the bottom line then is what the consumer experiences, and that's what these companies are using new technologies to push further and further.
So as companies roll out these new technologies, let's talk about the importance of the Universal Service Fund. It's a critical component to the success of NTA members. Talk about that fund and how those monies are used and why we in Nebraska might be more fortunate than other states, because the investment we've seen really has put us at the front of the pack.
Nebraska has really led the nation with implementation of a Nebraska high-cost universal service fund. A couple of very important benefits that come about from that fund. First of all, when NTA members put investment into the ground, it has to pay back over a very, very long period of time. I mean, think, it costs us, on an average, now it's going to vary from different places, but it costs us about $15,000 a mile to put fiber into the ground. That's a statewide average. So if it costs that much and you're going out maybe 10 miles to reach one customer, and according to the current law, we're going to charge $19.95 a month to recover those costs based on Universal Service Fund. If that's the mathematics, something has to be there in order to make it predictable and in order to make that investment pay back. And that's where the Nebraska Universal Service Fund comes in. It goes into only high-cost areas, and it is for the recovery of that investment. So what's that do to these companies that are business people too? Well, they sit down and they can say, I think the Nebraska legislature, the Nebraska Public Service Commission are stable, and I think the Universal Service Fund is going to exist long enough for me to get a decent payback on the investment I make. And that's why Nebraska probably has one of the best connected, highest speed areas in the country, is because of that predictability.
One final question, just to kind of make sure we understand it. I mean, and that's part of the mission today. Fiber's going in the ground all over Nebraska, in part thanks to the Universal Service Fund. It's truth in action. It is what they say. We have to be the envy of a lot of states because we have such a robust offering of services in a very rural area, and that's been a priority of the U.S. government, of the state government, of many state governments. What does that mean to Nebraska? At the end of the day, why is all that fiber just a future investment? I think you've covered it in a couple ways, but overall, the big picture.
Nebraska got it right. Congress passed legislation that encouraged states to develop their own high-cost network. Nebraska did. Most states didn't. Many states did not. A lot of states around us did, but Nebraska really took it to its logical conclusion, and they did it right. And what that does is it gives those companies the predictability to make very high cost investments and have the expectation that they'll be able to maintain and develop those investments going forward. What does that mean for people? That means that we're going to be able to enjoy productivity and connectivity that is unsurpassed around the country. And in terms of economic development, it's a real good argument for everybody to be aware that if you want to live and work in Nebraska and your business is a knowledge-based business, you can do it.
This is Eric Carstenson. He's the president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association. We appreciate his time today, taking an opportunity to educate not only us but other Nebraskans about what his members are doing. Thank you.